to start by, I think, paying tribute to the... would you turn on my mic? Yeah? That's on, is it? Okay. Oh, it's that one that's on, yeah. By paying tribute to the probably hundreds of volunteers who will spend tonight and many nights between now and Christmas in the towns and cities across this country, helping homeless people, people in poverty, people living in temporary accommodation, by giving them food, giving them toys, clothes and entertaining them. And they do so because there is a complete void in the services being provided by this state. There is a void because this state has allowed hundreds, thousands of people to live in homelessness, but it also has created a void for people who are in a poverty trap and who are desperate. So hats off to those volunteers who do this work for nothing. But to me it indicates that we have a population that cares much more about each other than the government cares about it. A year ago I spoke on this issue when this bill was up before in a different guise, and at that time I quoted to the Minister the story of Selina Hogan from Ballyfermot, who was about to be evicted from private accommodation with her 2 children, one with special needs and the teenage daughter who was suffering from depression because of what they were facing. And I was guaranteed that she'd be looked after. She'd probably spend a small bit of time in temporary accommodation into a family hub for about 6 months, and she should be able to get help. Nearly over a year later, having spent almost a year in a family hub and before that in hotel accommodation, Selina is still in the Ballyfermot family hub with no sign of her getting a home, and her children are no better and her mental health is no better. Tonight I spoke to Darren Cuff from Lower Ballyfermot, a 44-year-old man who's on dialysis, who's a diabetic and who's going blind. And the landlord has given him notice to quit. He took it to the RTB. The landlord gave him further notice to quit. That notice has run out. And I told Darren what Eileen Gleeson, the head of the Homeless Agency, told me to do, and that was to tell them to overstay. There was nowhere for them to go. Darren would not survive 10 minutes in a hostel, and that's all he would be given because he's a single man. Amina and her brother and mother, the mother in her 70s, the daughter and son in their 40s, are losing their home before Christmas, and I'm telling them the same thing. Overstay because you have nowhere to go. Your mother is not well and she won't survive in a hostel or in a hotel room. That's the situation we're faced on a daily basis, and nothing has changed in the previous year except it has gotten worse. Your predecessor argued against this bill at the time, and he said the issues involved are being addressed comprehensively through the rental strategy, associated legislative changes introduced under the Planning and Development and Residential Tenancies Act, and it's already delivering positive outcomes for tenants. And he went on to claim that the anti-eviction bill that we are introducing preempts any assessments of the positive impacts on tenant security that will arise from the implementation of the strategy on rent predictability measures in those areas already designated as rent pressure zones. Well, your colleagues and Fianna Fáil at the time raised the catch-all spectre that always bothers the great parliamentarian rhetoric here in this House, that of the unintended consequences. What has happened since? What has been the intended consequences of your government's opposition to this bill and the intended consequences of your housing policy? We know from thresholds reports that they have seen a dramatic rise in the number of calls received from tenants in danger of losing their homes, and the landlords who claim that they are about to sell the property. 32% of all calls in 2017 to threshold were from renters who are about to lose their property, and that is up 18% from 2016. They received 73,500 calls from the public last year. Increased vulnerability in this sector, Minister. The private renter sector is the leading source of homelessness in this country through evictions, both legal and illegal. And when I heard the contribution from Michael Fitzmaurice earlier on, one could only think of Black 47, the movie we saw recently, when he talked about the eviction that he witnessed in Longford. The completely unforeseeable consequences of your opposition to this bill a year ago has been to increase evictions and increase the crisis and the misery that is facing many people. And in the meantime, you continue to rely on the private market to deliver the housing, and you have failed, as your predecessors did, as Alan Kelly did, as Simon Coveney did, because they failed because of their subservience to the market, to profits, and the hostility of actually building public houses on public land. You've enriched a cohort of real estate investment trusts, private landlords, vulture funds, estate agents, speculators, developers and builders, and you continue to do so. And you failed to limit rent increases. Average rents across the Republic reached another peak of $1,304 a month, 560 higher than they were at the trough in 2011 and more than 26% higher than their high point during the Celtic Tiger. According to the quarterly rental support from the property websites, prices across the state are €274 per month higher than they were in the 2008 peak. And this capital has seen the highest average rent rises in the country, at 1,936, with rental growing and running at 13.4% higher than it was in June. That's so much for your rent pressure zones and your increase and controlling the rents. And this is not a mistake. It is the unforeseen consequence of government policy. It's a planned result of your government's incompetence and, I will argue, the class instincts of your government, the instincts that will weigh in with the landlord class, the very wealthy, the investors, the rich, the builders, the developers, rather than with the ordinary people, unlike the volunteers who are weighing in with those ordinary people across the country tonight. There is a war against the poor and the average working man and woman in this country, and your only energy in this, Minister, has been to create new methods of counting the homeless, and those new methods you can use to pretend that your policy is working. You are the great pretender, pretending that housing output is larger than it is, pretending that social housing bills are greater than they are, pretending that homelessness and rough sleeping is falling, and pretending that rents are stabilising. Your policies are working in one sense. They are working for landlords, for investors, for hedge funds, for REITs, and in your pretend world, they're working for you. You've thrown incentives and funds at builders and developers. You've moved heaven and earth to attract vulture funds and investment REITs. But you haven't, of course, done the one thing that might actually help end the misery for thousands of people in this country. You haven't changed the laws to address the imbalance of power between the landlord and the tenant. You haven't tried to ensure that citizens and tenants have security of tenure or fair rent, and you haven't even considered doing what this country managed to do when it was vastly poorer, with vastly less resources. We built public houses on public lands on a scale that was needed. You don't seem capable of doing that, and you certainly don't seem capable of having the political will to do that. Look, my final word is really to the landlords who occupy the seats in this House. There's at least 40 elected TDs who are landlords, probably more, if you count in all the independents. And I'm not begrudging you having an extra earner on the side, but what I am begrudging is the conflict of interest that emanates from landlords voting on a bill like this. This is a bill that is saying that landlords cannot evict their tenants if it is for the purpose of the sale of the property or the renovation of the property. Darren Cuff was told his property needs to be renovated. Amina Datsun was told that her property is to be sold. There is a conflict of interest for any TD in this House who votes on this bill and is also a landlord. I am calling on you all to use your conscience and to do the decent thing, although it might minimise the level of voting power in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to a large degree. It is still the decent thing to do, and if you don't do it, then you're being utterly indecent in your approach to this bill. And finally, my last word is for Fianna Fáil. The last time round you abstained, I think, from the bill, and I'm hearing more utterances of opposition to this one for some reason than I did the last time round. But I think you must also do the decent thing and abstain this time round. And if you abstain, maybe we'll have a chance of pricking the conscience of the Ceann Comhairle, who very, very unfortunately, almost tragically, for many families in this country, used his casting vote to throw out this bill. So I'm appealing to all...
Deputy Smith,
yes.
Ceann Comhairle explained his position before he left the chair, and maybe if you weren't here, your colleagues might advise you.
It was probably because I was busy at the Climate Change Committee. It's not because I was trying to ignore it.
Voted in accordance with custom.
Fair enough, you put that on the record.
He explained that he was a reluctant landlord.
He explained that he was a reluctant landlord, and that's why he voted. He used his casting vote. My point is that all of the decent TDs in this House should refuse to vote if they are TDs.
I will always defend the chair. I will always. Ceann Comhairle made a statement, and nobody questioned it. And I would ask you to accept his statement.
I accept his statement that I didn't hear. And my last point is to say to anybody with a modicum of decency in this House that we have to change what we're doing and look to share the wealth, not to hog it in the hands of a tiny few, but to share it for the benefit of the majority.
The Government Slot Minister.